Welcome back to Math 103. This is video number 14 on fair division. We continue our discussion of the resolution of a standoff between Eve and Fred over share S3. We've said already that shares S1 and S3 have been merged into a supershare that Eve and Fred have to divide up between the two of them using the divider-chooser method. It's very important that it's the divider-chooser method specifically. Now, Fred values this supershare at a total of $500,000. So ultimately, after the standoff has been resolved, we ask, how much will his share be worth to him? At least how much will his share be worth to him in dollars? Well, it's come down to Fred being a participant in divider-chooser over a piece of land worth $500,000. Well, the divider-chooser method guarantees him a share worth at least half that much. The divider-chooser method guarantees him a share worth at least half of $500,000 to him. In other words, Fred is guaranteed a share worth at least $250,000. If he happens to be the divider between him and Eve, if he happens to be the divider at the end, he will get a share worth exactly $250,000 to him. And if he happens to be the chooser, if Eve divides and Fred chooses within the super share, then he gets a share worth at least $250,000 and possibly more. In relation to the original problem from the start, where, from Fred's point of view, the whole piece of land, before anyone divided anything, was worth $700,000 to him, if at the end of this long process he's guaranteed at least $250,000 worth, then his share is worth at least 5/14, which is a little over 35% of the value of the whole property from his point of view. That is certainly a fair share with room to spare, right? So that's certainly more than the 25% that it needs to reach in order for the share to be fair to him. So yes, indeed, Fred does get a fair share here. It's very important that the specific way in which Eve and Fred resolve this standoff is by using the divider-chooser method. Not just some method, they use the divider-chooser method. If you're asked to explain how a two-player standoff is resolved, if you're going to really show that you've understood, it's important that you say that it's the divider-chooser method, which they use. Why is that so important? Because this is what guarantees that the division is a fair division at the end of the day. What happens if 3 players are involved in a standoff? That can happen too. And to see how, let's look at an example. This is a slight variation in the numbers from the previous example. You'll notice that Eve's numbers are the same as before, and so S3 is the only share that she will consider a fair share, based on the way that the 4 shares have been divvied up. So based on how Gail, who is still the divider, has placed those orange cones, Eve is thinking that only share 3 looks good to her. Fred also thinks that share 3 is the only one that really looks good to him. These are the same numbers as before. And now, after we've doctored these numbers a little bit, it turns out that Hank also thinks that share 3 is a fair share, but the others are not. So if you look at the sum of these valuations, this comes out to $600,000 total for Hank. A fourth of $600,000 is $150,000. Okay, so his minimum fair share amount is $150,000, and only share 3 is living up to that standard. So with these numbers, it turns out that Eve, Fred, and Hank are all involved in a standoff over S3. What can we do here? We again want to think in terms of our useful picture that Gail has put down a bunch of orange cones which can be picked up and rearranged, but for the moment she's put down a set of orange cones in a way that makes good sense to her, but that puts all of her siblings at each other's throats over who's going to get S3. So what can we do? Well, we can give Gail something other than S3. Just for example, let's give Gail S1. All right. So now Gail has been taken care of, And we can now merge the remaining shares into one big super share, an S2, S3, S4 combined super share, which is big, but it's still not quite as big as the original whole property. Before you go on to the next video, try to answer the following question. What can Eve, Fred, and Hank do with this newly formed super share, consisting of S2, S3, and S4, all combined, to produce fair shares for each of them? When there were only 2 players involved in a standoff, we had the divider-chooser method that we could apply, but now we have 3 players involved. So think, what could we do?